clock.
Everyone notices that? It's actually disconcerting.
It is.
You could like paint the walls a different color and no one would know, but you move the clock and it's like,
Where is that thing?
can I?
Well, thank you all very much for coming. Thank you for sending this in advance. That was very helpful. As you know, this is one of the series of meetings that we're having with stakeholders, and the goal is for us to find out more about what you think we're doing wrong and what you think we're doing right, and just to sort of understand whatever you would like us to understand, keeping in mind that we can't talk about anything that's pending. Your triennial plan update, for instance, is pending. So with that, go ahead.
Well, two things. One is, you know, we met with the other municipals. We kind of thought you were different because you are the big dog of municipal land. So, you know, not to say don't tell us about what the unique challenges are of being a municipal, but you are the big municipal, so tell us what those challenges are.
Yeah, and we're interested in things that we might not know about.
Yes.
Big fish, small pond?
Well,
I mean, you know.
but the other thing is, I think that a lot of you are familiar faces, but maybe we should do a round of introductions too. So I'll start. I'm Sarah Hoffman.
Kyle Landis-Marinello, General Counsel at the Commission.
Ann Bishop, I'm the Commission's Operations Director.
Tony Royster.
Tom Nauer.
Margaret Cheney.
Chris Burns, Director of Energy Services.
Betsy Lesnikoski, Chief Forester at McNeil Station.
Munir Kasti, COO, Manager of Utility Services and Engineering.
Mike Kannerick, Manager of Customer Care and Communications.
James Gibbons, Director of Policy and Planning. Darren Springer, General Manager.
And Jennifer Green, Sustainability Officer.
Would it be helpful at all to run through the slides, or would you prefer that we don't?
I would appreciate running through the slides.
Yeah, I think
that's it.
Thank you very much. I'll kick it off, and we'll hand off to different folks to discuss different topics. But we're delighted to be here. We thank you for having us, and we thank you for the opportunity to present, even separate from the other municipal utilities. We really appreciate the opportunity to be here. This is just a part of the great team at BED, and we wanted to bring folks who we thought could add some value to the conversation, but we have a number of great folks, 117 in total, both at the Pine Street headquarters as well as at McNeil Station, where Betsy is working as Chief Forester. Some basic just information on us in the first page here. Over 20,000 customers, actually over 21,000 customers now. We had to update that from the last time we ran these numbers. As you'll see, we have quite a few residential relative to commercial, but commercial is by far the largest of our customers in our energy use portfolio. In particular, we have customers like University of Vermont Medical Center, and the City of Burlington, who comprise some of our larger customers in the city. We have, as it notes here, a fairly significant AMI deployment for advanced meters throughout the city. So we have a lot of data and capabilities through that, some of which we're only beginning to tap into. We are summer peaking. We continue to be summer peaking. We've got our roughly 65 megawatt peak. Obviously that varies from year to year, but that's the rough number. We are seeing some benefit from in-city solar relative to that summer peak. So I know some utilities are grappling with different issues around solar. We are at a penetration level that continues to provide some value for peak for us, at least at the hour that we peak currently in the summertime. Third largest utility in Vermont, and obviously with Vermont Yankee no longer operating, McNeil's now the largest energy producer in Vermont, which we run the plant on behalf of the joint owners, ourselves, GMP, and Betsy.
So one thing on the first page, Darren, which is, I think, very unique, the number of renters you have and the amount of turnover, and that's student population in large part. In large part, that's correct. So we have and Mike's group really addresses this. We have a busy season in customer care, particularly in May, as we're changing over accounts. We also, you asked about some of the unique issues that we grapple with, and Chris will probably talk about this, but providing energy services, energy efficiency services for a renter population that's significant with significant turnover. And also we have a number of new American families in Burlington. And so we sometimes have some unique challenges both from a
not only a communication and energy education standpoint, but also making sure that everything that we're doing is serving the needs of all of our customers. So our energy efficiency utility services are in some ways uniquely focused on that particular dynamic.
And one last thing on this first page, McNeil, 62 megawatts?
Roughly 50 megawatts.
Yep. 50 megawatts nominal. It actually runs 54 megawatts winter peak, 52 megawatts summer peak during capability testing.
And where's your feedstock?
Pardon me?
The feedstock.
We should let Betsy answer that question.
Wood chips.
From all over the state, or your own stands? Or?
No, we don't own any land. We contract all of our supply. It's sustainably harvested under conditions in our public permit. We have 75% comes in by rail. So our rail yard is in Swanton, which is up in the northwest corner of the state. That opens up northern New York State too. So our supply comes from northern New York, northern Vermont, and 25% can come in from southern Vermont.
And what is your most common tree source?
We end up taking the residual, what is left over from a logging operation after everything else has been sold, the saw logs, the pulpwood, the firewood. So it's mostly tops or tree species that don't have another market. We can burn any type of wood. We don't need a specific species. It's all mixed together in the wood chip piles. So it's either the tops of trees or, say, low-grade aspen or white pine that doesn't have another higher value market.
One of the things I heard from Betsy this year that was interesting was we've been in business long enough that we're revisiting sites that we've harvested and reharvesting. So that's that was something I had not been aware of.
And
I think it's kind of neat.
That's due to the harvesting standards that we have. All of our jobs have to be pre-approved in Vermont. They go through an approval process with the Fish and Wildlife Department. They're interested in looking for impacts on wetlands, deer yards, threatened and endangered species. So we make sure that those are being protected. And they also have to have a forest management plan which looks out for the future so that we are selectively harvesting most of the time, growing new wood so that we can come back in 30 years and have new wood to harvest. And so all of our wood from Vermont comes in under a management plan.
And how about your fuel prices? I assume they don't fluctuate the same way as oil or gas or.
We try to keep them as steady as possible so that the suppliers in the woods have an idea of what they're going to get in the future. Energy prices determine our fuel price, so we have to find a sweet spot where we can keep suppliers in business and keep the plant running, because if we're paying too much, the energy prices don't make it efficient to run.
I mean, there's an indirect link because transportation, fuel for transportation,
right.
But it's like a 10% maybe feedback loop. So there's a little bit of a cross effect, but not much.
I think it's also interesting to note, I think we have dozens, really, I've seen between 50 and 75 suppliers in a given year who we work with, both upstate New York, but also a lot of Vermont communities as well.
And those are direct suppliers coming to us, and then there's an added multiplier for all of the money that stays locally, the fuel that's bought locally, the equipment that's bought locally, the money that's going into local pockets and local families. So those 75 suppliers actually spread their money out in a broader sense locally.
Since I'm a real neophyte here, give me some idea of the volume. How many tons of wood are you burning in a day?
They burn about 12 to 1,500 tons a day if they're running full load round the clock. 75 tons an hour. Last year we bought 374,000 tons, and the plant used 387,000 tons. So it's a big volume locally. It's the biggest wood using industry in the state because we don't have any other pulpwood facilities or big markets. We just have small sawmills. But I guess I'd like to put that in perspective. It sounds like a lot, but when we look at statewide harvests, just all harvest of all wood in Vermont, they're only cutting 50% of the annual growth. So this is data that the federal government takes. They know how much is growing each year, and we report, all wood-using industries report their harvest. So only 50% of annual growth is being cut. Burlington Electric is only taking 9% of that. So there's a lot more wood being grown in the state than everybody's using, and we're only using about 5% of that annual growth. So the numbers sound big, but there's a lot of resource out there.
The only other thing I'd offer, if you're not familiar with the permit from McNeil, that's interesting, is that we have to take 3/4 of our wood deliveries by rail. We do not take truck deliveries for the majority of our wood supply. And that was a recognition of trying to avoid truck traffic through the Winooski area, through the Five Corners area. So.
Was that part of the original agreement when the fund was?
Yes, it
Yes.
is. So the original 248 permit recognized that, you know, while roads are a public access right, it was desirable not to have that much trucking go through Winooski. And so 3/4, we have to take at least 3/4 by rail. So that adds a transportation dimension that other plants may not have to do.
And limits the greenhouse gases from transportation.
Correct.
Unless it's a diesel train.
We've tried to work electric trains. That's challenging. We've actually had a meeting with the railway on that, but it's a little tricky.
Yeah.
How many rail cars a day?
We take up to, it's a train a day, 21 cars per train, and we'll do 5 to 6 trains per week. So we transfer, the plant will run about a train load a day. So if it's running full load, we can bring in a train and run the plant on a train load.
So moving to slide 2, when we do customer surveys, the number one priority for our customers is reliability. Maybe no surprise, but well above cost, well above any other issue is reliability. And we've had a tremendous track record here, and I'm going to ask Munir to talk about our improvements with reliability.
Yes. So just a quick summary. Our distribution system is connected to through 3 substations at East Avenue, Queen City, and McNeil. At East Avenue and Queen City, we connect to the transmission, Velco transmissions, 115 to 13.8 step-down transformers. And at McNeil, we're connecting to the generation, which is the McNeil plant, and also to East Avenue, which is Velco, as well as GMP system. We have 13 primary circuits that serve the cities. It's about 133 miles of overhead circuits. 47% of that is underground and 53% aerial. That's the primary circuit, which is the high voltage 13.8 kV distribution system. We measure our reliability in terms of 2 indices. One of them is the system average interruption frequency index, SAFE, and the other one is the customer average interruption duration index, the KD. Our SAFE, which is the almost the average number of outages per customer, is about 0.43 for 2018. And the KD, the duration of the outage, the average is 0.93 hours. What does that mean?
What were they in 2017, just for comparison purposes? Oh, next page, sorry.
What we have is really historical SAFE and KD. In 2017, our SAFE was 0.66 interruption per customers and 0.57. And 2018 is 0.43. Our KD is 0.93, the previous year 0.92 and 0.94 hours. And what does that mean is that less than half of our customers have seen less than 1 outage for, I'm sorry, they have seen less than 1 outage actually, yes, for a duration of less than 1 hour in the city.
And what is your most common cause for the outages? Is it weather related?
The most common type of outages are really our planned outages, the outages that we take to avoid future unplanned outages like weather or equipment failures. For 2018, there are about 50% of our outages are planned outages. And the reason we do them because obviously we live in Vermont, the weather is cold, there's lots of snow and ice. We want to avoid having unplanned outages during the winter where it takes a lot of time to go back because we're underground and find where the outage is and restore it. So we are very proactive about maintaining our system and trying to do as much as we can proactively before the equipment fails.
Say beyond that, we sometimes see animal contacts.
Yes.
Oh,
The ever popular squirrels.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
Yes.
you know, we were able to reduce those numbers because we have gone on pretty much more, I would say 60-70% of our circuit and installed protective equipment to avoid animal contacts, squirrels, birds on our energized equipment on the poles. And for 2018, that number has gone down to 12% of our outages, but we used to be in the mid to high 20s in the past. And we're still continuing in the future to try to install those equipment and try to, as much as we can, insulate our equipment from those type of outages. And what we've done and we continue to do is go and replace our very old direct buried underground system, which is basically those cables that were installed 50, 60 years ago without conduits, just they were installed and buried. And you can't pull them out. Like if you have a conduit system, the cables go inside the conduit. If you have an outage, you can pull it quicker and pull new cables, versus the other one where you have to find where the outage is and dig the whole thing out and just try to see what you can do basically. So that's for the safety and KD, and the other one, and actually the goals for us for safety is 2.1 interruption per customer. And the KD is the goal that we report to the PUC on the annual basis is 1.2. So we're below those. Now, does the 2.1 make sense anymore? No. So at some point we're going to have to probably revise those numbers. And then the other one we also maintain, we look at is our losses. The energy wasted on our lines and our system. And we have successfully through the implementation of our energy efficiency on our distribution system projects, reduce those losses. And from the early '96, where actually the time I started, from over 4% to 2017 to 1.7%. And those projects we're talking about is the one we describe in our integrated resource plan every time we filed. We screen the projects, if they are cost effective based on societal cost, we implement them. And those are the project to reduce the losses. From balancing the load on the circuits to install capacitor banks to install new circuit or reduce the load on circuits. A bunch of projects.
I mean, needless to say, distribution losses are normally higher than this. This is a function of a tight system.
Yes.
And the improvements.
So on the next page, we have some information around the rates and capital. We have not had a rate case since 2009. When you look at our trajectory, there are a couple factors that really play into that, the ability to hold rates steady since 2009. One is related to a voluntary buyout and a reorganization that occurred in the 2015-2016 timeframe that kept controllable costs relatively flat when they would have been on probably a significant growth trajectory. So that's one factor. The rec markets and rec prices, certainly another factor. I'll ask James to touch on that in just a moment. But we are, obviously we face all the same financial pressures that all the other utilities face in certain respects relative to whether it's transmission costs, whether it's labor, inflation, and other types of costs. So managing that is something that we take very seriously. Even with holding rates steady, we've been increasing our capital program, making investments in distribution that Amir referenced that help our reliability. We're currently going through a multi-year process to upgrade our IT systems, which is really a cross-organizational effort that involves business process improvement, upgrades to our meter data management, our financial information systems, and our customer information systems. So we've done an RFI to get some information from potential marketplace vendors, and we're going to be moving to an RFP process. And we think that the capabilities that we'll gain from that IT upgrade are going to be pretty transformational for the organization in terms of our ability to implement new and innovative programs, whether they be around rates or whether they be around net metering, other types of programs. We're going to have better capabilities once we move through that. James, why don't you touch on the rec market effects for us?
Sorry, my voice is, I'm just getting a little cold this week. So we are a large player in the rec markets. We were an early adopter of renewable energy and long-term contracts. So, you know, for us, I think we peaked out around $13 million of annual rec revenues. Currently, we're sitting around $8 million of annual rec revenues. At one point, rec revenues were larger than our residential sales in terms of a revenue source for the utility. We also buy recs, and so we've been able to retire recs generally in excess of our load, even while still selling recs. So typically, we're arbitraging, if you will, recs by trying to keep our rates under control, selling the higher value recs while we can, and using lower value recs to retain renewability. Now, the Vermont Renewable Energy Standard will modify how we do that, but what we have is a very high level of optionality in the sense that we can meet the Vermont Renewable Energy Standards for 2032 today. So we can choose how we want to meet those standards and the cheapest way to meet those standards, knowing that we have the resources in hand effectively. However, the rec markets have fallen dramatically. I'm going to approximate 2 years ago, Class 1 recs for New England were selling in the $45 range, give or take. I just did a small sale for $6 recs, same recs. So, you know, you're not talking a minor change in prices. Now, we buffered that by doing rolling forward sales. So we have not seen the full effect of that market decline yet. Our forward sales are designed to bridge temporary periods of market downturn. This has been longer than we would like, and we're going to start to see some of those other contracts roll off. You know, the higher price contracts signed 2 years ago start to roll off, and if the markets haven't recovered somewhat, we will start to see some pressure from that. It is a.
So do you anticipate a rate case because of the dramatic fall in rec prices?
We don't anticipate that immediately in fiscal year 19. Our fiscal year runs through the end of June. We had signaled to our electric commission, to our Board of Finance and City Council, who approves our budget, that there was a possibility that depending on different factors, we might need a rate case in sometime in the near future. We currently don't anticipate that for fiscal year 19 when we're building the fiscal year 20 budget. So over the next few months, we'll have a better sense of what fiscal year 20 looks like and whether or not that's necessary.
Do you think that rec prices are actually going to go up, given how all the states are very actively involved now in getting renewable resources online?
Well, that's, and again, I would like to say that I'm not a pure rec market expert. I do a lot of different things, so I'm going to give you what the information I've got. I think you've got that pressure, which is a supply side pressure, or demand pressure, if you will, being tempered by a lot of large contracts being let for, you know, renewable resources coming from Canada and things like that. So I think that you have other supplies coming into the mix as well. Most recently, for example, Connecticut dropped the alternative compliance payment on their Tier 1 from $55 to, I believe, $45, but they bumped up the supply requirements, and they actually, I should say, they extended them further in the future with an increase. I would hope things like that would tend to support the price. I would be happier with stable prices in, you know, sort of the $20 to mid $30 range. It's nice to have them at the $45 range. It's very inconvenient to have them stay at the $6 range. So, you know, I'm hoping that we see some stabilization in those prices and that it stabilizes at a higher level than $6. Currently, the instant year, the 2018, is the most depressed year, but 2019 and 2020 are not particularly strong. They're in the 2 cents or less a rec, or $20 a megawatt hour or less a rec. So they're still not very strong, and they're a lot weaker than they have been. I think the prior downturn that we saw was in the beginning of 2010, where it went down to maybe $11 or $12 a rec. That was the lowest it had been before this, and that was a very short duration drop. That was essentially one market year. This has been now more than one market year. And we have to balance, when we forward sell recs, the potential for damages if we fail to deliver them. I mean, essentially we're selling recs from intermittent resources where we can't always be sure we know how much energy they're going to produce. And so if you're selling recs forward at low, depressed prices, you're basically exposed to the damages up to the compliance payment if you don't deliver them. So it's a balancing act, you know, in terms of risk versus revenue certainty versus production.
What are the resources you're selling, like Winooski 1 in Georgia?
The primary, I mean, we're actually a large player in the rec market in aggregate. So we're selling, McNeil is Connecticut Class 1 qualified. And we actually trade those recs on behalf of both GMP and BED. So we're the trading entity for both of those people. We trade Winooski 1 on the Mass Class 2 market, which is a very strong market. That is a market that is not depressed, by the way. That is a market that is essentially designed short. So it's trading at near its ACP of $26, and so that market is very helpful. And then on the general Class 1, we're selling wind recs. So coming out of Georgia Mountain Community Wind, Sheffield, and Hancock Wind in Maine. So to a very small extent, we have some other rec sources, like from our solar plants and things like that. But in terms of the volume, that's where the volume is coming from.
What's your percentage of Sheffield?
Our percentage of Sheffield is 40%. So we are, so you've got, you know, but our contract for Sheffield, to be fair, expires in 2021. So certainly that's factoring into the discussions about the Sheffield Highgate export interface constraints, is that we are not a long-term off-taker for that. We were a 10-year off-taker for that.
Another unique aspect of our business at Burlington Electric is obviously that we continue to serve our customers with energy efficiency services as an electric, or as an energy efficiency utility. We have a long track record there as well, and some really great accomplishments and unique capabilities because of that. And Chris Burns leads that program, and so he's going to cover the next slide. I would note that the photo here is from our energy efficiency calendar contest, which Mike Canerick helps to organize along with Brian Riley from our energy services team. We have a few calendars here if anyone's interested. The program is that fourth graders from all of the different elementary schools in Burlington have the opportunity to compete to be chosen for a month of the calendar with different energy efficiency related artwork. And we have Champ, the guy from the Lake Monsters baseball team, Mayor Weinberger, and some of the children here with us at BED in this photo. So I'll turn it over to Chris.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having us back. I've seen you all recently in the
yes, you look
familiar. So I won't dwell unless you have specific questions, but I thought that was a very interesting conversation we all had at the annual plan presentations. You know, the focus to meet our resource acquisition for both electric and TEPF is as we talked about last month. We continue to plow away and think about different strategies for what Darren mentioned on the first couple slides is the rental issue. It's vexing to some degree, but there are strategies that we are going to continue to try to deal with the split incentive issue and the renter themselves.
Would you expand on your earlier discussion with us about how your current program, where you're creating economic incentives for the landlord to buy in by a little stick, a little carrot?
Yes, so that's that was the policy question we had about the energy efficiency in traditional incentive programs. How effective have they been in the split incentive market when the tenant is paying the energy bills? The city, for the longest time, has done two things. One, we had an energy code that dealt with renovation prior to the state's energy codes, which we think helped move the needle a bit. And then in 1998, the city council passed the time of sale energy ordinance, which basically says if you're selling a rental property and the tenant pays the heating costs directly, the building must be inspected and, if found deficient, brought up to a level of efficiency. We think that that is a platform to grow from, and we're thinking about a number of different things to work on that. There's things like energy labeling, benchmarking, strengthening ordinances. I think I mentioned in the EEU annual plan, leveraging our other departments as a municipal entity, and that is there is a very robust rental inspection division that deals with issues of mostly health and safety, but now it's getting into things like lead and other trip and fall issues. Can we use our energy efficiency work and work together in the rental property? But as we look at things through the lens of the net zero energy city strategy. Where can policy come in and help as the stick, I think is, and then have the energy efficiency programs be there as the incentive. So I don't have any definitive ideas yet, but the first one is we actually have a conversation with the mayor now about strengthening the time of sale ordinance. I hope that answered it.
Yeah, it did. Thank you.
Chris, we really appreciate when you come in talking about some of these challenges. You know, you're very open about places that are difficult and what you're trying to do to change them. So.
Thank you. Our work with Vermont Gas is absolutely key. It may sound a bit strange in the strategic electrification world, but we think it's important to work both sides. As I've talked about in the new construction realm, we're seeing electrification happening. Heat pumps are just happening because it's desired by the developer or the owner. But there's a lot of existing buildings out there that will be on a slower path, and to work with the Vermont Gas's energy efficiency team, you know, as effectively as we can for the benefit of both ratepayers. We think that's just another lane we should be in. So since meeting with you last month, the teams have probably met 3 or 4 times to keep thinking about, all right, how do we strengthen the relationship? So the world is a little complex. We have customers who are clearly wanting to electrify their thermal loads and do other things. They want to do EVs. They want to do solar, and we'll be ready for that. And then we have those customers who, for a number of reasons, are going to stay where they are. You know, we've got 95% of our residential class on natural gas, 99% of our commercial. So we want to be able to align our programs to help folks where they are. So that's essentially it.
Could I ask a question about the previous slide? The one bullet at the end that did not touch on.
Yes, the technologies.
Yes.
Yes. So we, and I'll ask James to talk about it as well, but we are increasing, and this actually ties back to Chris's conversation. We've had great success with energy efficiency. We use 6% roughly less electricity today than we did in 1989 when the first major energy efficiency bond issue in Burlington was in that time period, 89, 90. But we are seeing, obviously, with strategic electrification and some of the potential benefits and some of the potential challenges around that, the need to have a greater focus on technology. We've submitted, and it's been approved by the PUC, and we'll be rolling out very shortly to our customers an electric vehicle rate that will incentivize off-peak charging for residential customers. In that, just that one program, the ability to have a little bit of focus on what types of technologies are there for the customer. Do we need to have a level 2 charging station? Are there capabilities around other types of Wi-Fi enabled devices? And so James and his team have really kind of started to focus in on partnering locally where we can with technology companies that can help us meet those solutions. And if you want to elaborate.
So this is, I think, the first year that there's been any form of R&D budget, if you will, call it an R&D budget. I mean, at BED, it's in my department, it's not very big. But what we were finding was that we needed to test devices. We needed to be able to test a charging station and make sure that we could assimilate the data from it, that the data from it could be fed into our billing system to build the EV rate. We wanted to make sure that the metrology in those charging stations was equivalently accurate in a manner equivalent to our standard metering, things like that. So for example, outside of our offices now, we have a bunch of different charging stations from different companies that are paired up with AMI meters, and my staff can verify that the metrology is accurate, that they're recording it correctly. We have a Fleet Karma device that actually sits in a car and monitors its charging wherever it goes. You can line that up with the charging stations and the AMI data. You can compare it to mileage driven, things like that. So we're starting to explore those devices. You've heard probably about packetized energy. We were the first people to sign a contract with them, and so we're starting to buy their devices. But we need to test these devices. We need to make sure that we can bring those data streams in. And so, for example, in the EV charging rate, you know, the rate was approved, but we had to actually go and find devices that would work, make sure that we could assess that, you know, accept the data. We had to contract with these entities. I mean, it's not, you know, it's not a given that ChargePoint will provide you access to the data from a ChargePoint station. We actually had to contract with ChargePoint to have access to the billing data. And you run across these little challenges, and we needed the fund to be able to try to figure out how to resolve these things. And so that's now new. We have a blockchain program going out this month. It's actually starting now. It's a mega grid pilot blockchain price signal to customers for times where they may want to bid to not consume electricity. That's a pilot project, but we do have customers that have signed an agreement to give that a trial. But again, we're finding these challenges, and we're finding we need to have ways to address them.
Would those typically be commercial customers?
Not universally, generally, but not universally. And people like it's confidential. The King Street Youth Center has storage on the rooftop, so for example, they were very interested. This is a way for us to potentially, within our current rate structure, allow them to try utilizing their storage in a different manner. So this is a partially grant-funded program through the APPA DEED program. Jen Green was very helpful in getting us a grant, and we had to do something with it. She keeps doing that to me.
More work.
More work. It's like, here's some money, do something. It's like, oh, crap. You keep getting, we get approved on all the grants and all of the intern requests and stuff like that. And it's actually inconvenient sometimes. Like I was counting on at least a 50% rejection rate. So. But anyway, it is very interesting, and you find yourself running across very strange problems, and some of this is coming up. I think the EV docket is non-contested. The ESC. So I'll just say, the example would be ChargePoint sending us a contract saying you have the right to use the data for billing for the duration of the contract. But if at the end of the contract, if this contract ends and we can terminate it for any reason with 30 days notice, you have to return the data. Well, that makes it a little tough to do a billing rate or to provide, if a customer asks a month later for billing verification. So we had to push back on them and change those contract terms to say we need the data for at least a minimal amount of time. We would need time for transition. We would need data retention for billing verification at a dead minimum, and we need to report to you people sales under that rate. So I mean, it's not always easy to solve some of these problems that sound very easy. And we're very focused too on having more than one option available to our customers. We don't want to say that the only thing you can do is a ChargePoint level 2 station. So that's where that's where this comes in.
I would say too, we found ourselves occasionally on the leading edge such that the technology hasn't caught up. In the EV rate, I've been very interested in whether or not we can provide an option for customers who don't want to have a level 2 charging station installed, because obviously there's the cost, the electrical wiring, the convenience of that. So we were looking for a UL listed, outdoor weather appropriate plug device for a level 1 style plug-in hybrid vehicle. And we've not been able to find one that is also Wi-Fi enabled and could send the data in the manner that we would need. We found cellular devices, but then that adds cost. We found devices that'll do the job but are not particularly UL listed for outdoor weather. So I've been trying to partner even nationally with organizations that we work with to put out a call, does anyone have this type of technology? And at the moment, we've not found it yet.
Well, to be clear, we can do it. It's economical. It's the problem. Well, we could sub-meter it with an AMI meter and things like that. The problem is, if you're trying to defeat the need for a $600 charging station, $1,200 metering doesn't solve the problem. So we're trying to fix that. But I think we found a device that looked really promising, and it was unfortunately not recommended for cold weather. It didn't like moisture. I forget what else it didn't like, and it wasn't UL listed.
Other than that, it was perfect.
Other than that, though, it had every capability we wanted. So.
Yes.
So it's great for Hawaii.
Yes, it's great for indoors in Hawaii.
Yes.
But not so much in Vermont. So that's been a challenge. And we would really like to make sure that the ability to charge off-peak is available to people who want to use level 1 charging, but sub-metering that for billing purposes economically and getting the data back to BEV is proving to be the problem without simply incurring a different type of $700 charge.
Can you tell us a little bit in some detail how you educate your customers about the availability of these innovative things, whether it's a better rate or a new product or getting converted from one form of energy to electric energy? I'd like to hear more about your education program.
I'm going to ask Mike, who leads the customer care team, the primary interface, as well as Chris's energy services team, take that one.
Sure. We communicate through many channels. I'll use the example of the upcoming special EV charging rate. In that instance, we will have a press conference with the mayor and Darren and other members of our team and try to get as much media coverage as we can so that our community knows what's happening. And we'll couple that with an op-ed in some of the local papers. We are heavy users of social media. We have a marketing team that's really increased our social media presence, primarily Facebook and Twitter, but beyond that. We make use of Front Porch Forum and communicate with our customers that way. We also, if you're familiar with the monthly paper in Burlington, the North Avenue News, it's a great, community newspaper. It's the kind of paper that sits around on the table for the month, and people really read it. We, in our triennial customer care survey, we found that people really get a lot of information from the North Avenue News. We wondered, and we learned they do, and so we have a monthly column in there. We also, with our customer care reps, physically in our offices, the customer care team and the energy services team are right next to each other. And we collaborate all the time. And what we've tried to do over the last several years is really equip our customer care reps with more training and information about the programs we're running. And Chris's team and James's team as well, the whole outfit, has been great about having trainings for our customer care team. And to meet our call answer time, we have these meetings at 7 in the morning before the phones start ringing, and everyone's great about coming in early. But we are really educating our customer care reps about the program so that when the call comes in to start service or a high bill question, we're taking care of their need and we're saying, hey, are you familiar with? And we have talking points on that. And it's great too, just internally for morale, the reps really enjoy digging deeper into what we're offering at Burlington Electric. So lots of communication channels, early and often. And we're out in the community too at different events, and we share our programs with our customers.
And I would say
bills themselves.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad you mentioned that. We do include bill inserts in our bills. I'd say of the 12 bills a year, probably between 6 and 8 of them, we will have an insert in there about programs that we're running. And that's like a separate insert with the bill. But additionally, right on the bill, we have a box called Important Messages, and we have messages in there that really push our customers toward the website to learn about new programs. And our website presence, we're constantly trying to improve how we connect and communicate with people on our website so that when they're visiting, it doesn't look static and stale. They know where to find things, but there's something interesting to view on the website each time they're going.
I was going to say the other thing beyond everything that Mike mentioned is we do value partnerships with a number of the third parties who are in the energy space. So, one interesting example of that, and it's through our website, is we have something called the Solar Shopper program, which we developed where we put an RFP out to solar installers who are working in Burlington. We received 6 well-qualified responses. We selected 6 partners. And the deal for our customers is essentially they can submit on our website a very short form, 10 questions, some basic information. We get that out to the solar vendors who potentially install net metering for them. This is residential scale, 15 kilowatts and under. Within 3 business days, we return to the customer up to 6 estimates with different types of information, where the panel's made, what type of warranty. There are certain standards we had just to get into the program. We use our own rate trajectory as opposed to the generic rate trajectory that the vendor would typically use, so the customer can get a more realistic payback.
We don't do 5% per year rate growth.
Right, and it's been a nice program in terms of that. We also, just from a thinking about alternative revenue standpoint, we set it up so that the vendors pay an annual fee to be a part of the program. We provide obviously some support through our website, through our team, but it also brings in a limited amount of revenue to support that type of effort. So I think in addition to everything Mike said, we also really value those types of partnerships, whether it's on EVs, with auto dealers, whether it's with Green Mountain Transit on electric buses, whether it's Local Motion and some of our local bike retail shops on electric bikes. I think in addition to every channel that we have, we value the fact that there are third parties in this space and we want to partner with them. That's our model.
Can I add one more?
Sure.
Okay, so just the other thing that's interesting too is, of course, is sometimes we can do direct contact. So in the case of the EV rate, We know the customers through our Tier 3 program who bought EVs. We know the customers who have level 2 chargers that will already work. So we already know the customers in Burlington that have ChargePoint level 2 chargers. We've actually done a soft rollout. So we picked a few of those customers, contacted them directly, and so we're making sure that our systems work before we announce in the press release on the 22nd that it's available for everybody. When we do something like packetized energy, we have an existing water heater clock control program, which is a very old school clock control program. Those will be the direct targeted customers for the packetized energy device, which is a much more advanced method of controlling that load. So we can use direct contact too, where we have specific reason to believe that a target market segment is going to be interested.
Thank you.
So from a slide perspective, you're actually still up, James, to talk about power supply.
We, by the way, I almost ended up at the VEPSA meeting with you guys. We decided you only needed to see me once. So that was our courtesy to you guys.
You're welcome.
So yeah, Ken and I was like, yeah, they don't need to see us. So I think you're generally all familiar with our power supply. Essentially, it's sitting at really rough terms: 1/3 wood, it's actually a little more, 1/3 hydro, mixture of large and small, and 1/3 wind, with solar backing it up, essentially as a more of a peaking resource than an energy producing resource. We like the coincidence with our peak load, as Darren mentioned, but it's still not a large energy slice of our segment. We do have one very small slice in here that I'm going to go ahead and out right now, which is the BED gas turbine at 0.2%. That is an oil-fired unit on the waterfront. Generally run only for testing purposes. We've yet to figure out a way to run it for testing purposes without inadvertently producing some energy. And the pie slice you see here is actually excess to our load needs, which is how we can be essentially 100% renewable and have that little 0.2% slice kicking around in there, is because we're not actually needing that piece of the energy to serve our load. So, I mean, unless you had any specific questions about the resources, I would probably just leave it at that in the interest of time. So again, I'm sorry, just one last thing. So those are the 3 wind plants we talked about: the Sheffield, Hancock, and Georgia Mountain are sitting in that slice. Large hydro is NYPA and Hydro-Quebec. Okay. Small hydro is specific contracts with things like the Great River plants on the Connecticut River, or some of the small hydro plants in New England. And the wood is, we do not get Rygate under the statutory exemption. The next slide is just simply our accounting for the RES Tier 1 this year, 2017. Obviously, we are retiring RECs from all renewable resources in excess of our load. I mean, we're at 100%. I think we're actually more like 105% when we actually look at retirements. Simply because if something isn't economical to sell, we'll retire it. I mean, it's, if we're not going to sell a REC at 50 cents and incur the transacting fees and things like that, if we have to, we'll just retire those as well. It just puts additional pressure on the market, in our opinion. Predominantly, we're doing, the REC purchases are almost exclusively hydro. I'm not sure if there's any exception to that. We have native hydro in the form of Hydro-Quebec and part of NYPA. The St. Lawrence tailed off in terms of being eligible for Tier 1 partway through the year, but Niagara still is. And then we have, again, those contracts for in-region resources for small hydro, like the Connecticut River Hydro and things like that, where we essentially buy the bundled hydro, unit contingent, energy and RECs, and we don't ever intend to sell those RECs. So those RECs basically go directly to retirement against our obligations when we buy that kind of a REC.
Would you just mention, I think other than NYPA, Hydro-Quebec, and Hancock, all of our resources are Vermont-based.
I'm sorry, run that by me again. Hancock,
Hydro-Quebec, NYPA.
Yes, that is true.
Every other resource is a Vermont-based resource.
So, and between those 3, I'm just doing math in my head real quick. NextEra, 8 for the Hancock, maybe 4. I mean, I would say we're probably, I could check this number, but I would not be surprised to find we're 80% in Vermont resources at this point. Maybe higher than that. No, it's going to be close.
And what are your residential rates?
Chris can answer that if you like.
We sit, if you stack up the utilities, I think we are the second lowest at about 15 cents a kilowatt hour for the standard residential rate.
The tail block is, and if you break it down, we have the initial block, tail block structure with the customer charge. So is that the all-in?
That's the all-in.
Yeah. Is that that's average revenues per kilowatt hour?
Yes.
Yeah. So
Initial block is 10.8 cents, tail block 14.7 cents.
And it would have the customer charge weighted in there.
$8.21.
So that's all in average 15 cents.
And how big is the initial block?
I think it's 100 right
100,
now.
yeah, 100 hours. The next slide here is around Tier 3 and some of the programs that we're running. I actually touched on a few of them briefly, but we are trying very hard to expand our offerings there and make them as relevant as possible for our customers. So we've been focused a lot on electric transportation in particular. Transportation is a significant source of emissions in Vermont, also for Burlington, also one of the tough nuts to crack for us. We do have some unique opportunities, I think, given our kind of compact, dense geographic service territory. So uniquely, I think we are working on the electric bus program with Green Mountain Transit. We've offered Tier 3 incentives and brought in some grant funding as well that should lead us to have at least 2 electric buses in the Green Mountain Transit service fleet in 2019, which we're very excited about. Hopefully that'll be a groundbreaking program that will continue to move forward. These numbers here for the electric vehicle rebate and the plug-in hybrid rebate are updated numbers, which I think we're going to be announcing publicly on the 22nd as part of our EV rate announcement.
Yeah, the change to our Tier 3 program was filed on December 7th, so we're sitting in a 30-day window. We'd originally timed it for a press release around the 10th, but there's been the inauguration got in the way of our press release a little bit, so.
Right.
But that's what we're looking around, is that 30-day notice from the December 7th change to the EV program rates.
Right. And we've been working on the electric bike program as well, which has had some significant uptake from customers. We have a partnership with Local Motion, which is a local bike and pedestrian-oriented organization, and they have a lending library of electric bikes for folks to try. And then we've been giving an instant rebate at our local retail shops of $200. We've had, again, significant uptake on that. Jen actually commutes on an electric bike to work many days, including sometimes in the snow. So they really do work, I think we could say. We've seen it.
She's beaten me to McNeil.
That's right, James. You owe me that beer.
Yeah, I do I owe her a beer for beating me.
Let the record reflect.
The BD will bet beers, but only after hours.
We've had less focus on, to date, in the heating sector on things like heat pumps for natural gas customers. We've got the rebate here for oil and propane customers. As part of our partnership with Vermont Gas, we're exploring how that could be part of a package, potentially with some Tier 3 incentives there with natural gas. We've worked on workplace charging. We have an incentive for folks who want to put that in, $1,000. I mentioned the e-bus. I did not mention in our partnership discussion that we do have 3 credit unions who are listed here who work with us with our EV rebate. So the typical process, if you go and purchase or lease an electric vehicle, is you go at the point of sale, you send a rebate form to Chris's team, and they send you a check. With the credit union partnership, you're able to get the rebate at the point of sale and finance through one of the credit unions, or use the rebate to help lower your interest rate. So you have a couple of different options there. And importantly, we do offer an enhanced rebate for low and moderate income customers. We recognize that even at the ACP level, which is where that's offered essentially, $1,800 for the EVs, or the old ACP level, we've still had 2 customers out of 50 some odd who have taken advantage of the EV rebate, who have taken advantage of the low moderate income piece. So we know that there's more work to do there, and we're always trying to be creative about how we can help more folks access EV.
Yeah, on that, I guess I'm wondering, I know the federal tax credit, as I understand it, you only get it if you're above a certain income. So it sounds like you've only had 2 customers take that. I guess, how could you actually get more uptake for low and moderate income customers?
With the federal incentive, one way to get around that issue is if you lease the vehicle, the auto company essentially takes the tax credit and is supposed to provide you a lower lease cost. So our incentive can apply in that scenario as well.
It would apply to a leased vehicle.
It can apply to a leased vehicle as well. Okay. So that's one way to potentially help where folks might not be eligible to take the tax credit. It's an up to $7,500 tax credit. For a few automakers, it's beginning to phase out. And for some plug-in hybrids, it's not quite $7,500. And unlike the solar federal tax credit, which you can roll from year to year for up to 5 years in order to take full advantage of, EV is a 1-year deal. So if you don't have enough taxable income in that given year, you don't get the full credit. But the lease can get you around that if you get a good lease deal. Yeah.
Darren, maybe one thing to add is just our conversations with CarShare Vermont about helping them to add EVs to their fleets, as they serve a fair amount of low and moderate income customers.
Absolutely.
And I saw that you ran you just ran a reverse auction, RFP, hoping to get something. Nothing?
Zero
That's
responses.
terrible.
We are revising that.
And it was press released on our website.
Just
we got,
nobody had any ideas, I guess.
or they didn't twig to it. You know, it was interesting to me in a recent discussion where it's like, well, we're paying really close attention to this. It's like, well, you missed this. It was open-ended. It was aimed at either measures or even programs. Theoretically, you know, Efficiency Vermont could have responded. Nobody responded. We are not giving up on that, but we're looking at revisiting how we do the RFP, and we're probably going to have to reissue it with a modified basis. But the idea was we were going to let people bid as to how affordably they think they could do a Tier 3 measure or program, and we were going to select, you know, the winning bidders, and we had committed funding to it. So I was a little surprised.
Yeah, that is surprising.
We are hopeful that when we reissue it with maybe a more streamlined process, that we'll get a better market response.
I suspect we'll at least hear from the biofuel people after the last workshop. He knows what I'm talking about. I think that's a dead given. So
one of the things I'm interested in is you have on one end energy efficiency, distributed generation, reducing your sales, and you have all these programs that you're encouraging to get people to electrify who don't now. What are your projections 5 years from now? Do you expect to be selling more electricity than you're selling today? Less or about the same amount?
I'm going to go by memory, if it's okay.
Yeah, go
I think
ahead.
it was in the IRP. I think it's slightly more is the answer. I think that you start to see electrification, you know, you start to get to where you've done the best bang stuff in the efficiency side, and you start to see electrification start to offset it. I mean, we've had declining loads, and I don't think we see that continuing necessarily. I think, and I'll mention this in the next slide, is that the existence of natural gas in Burlington is probably slowing down our electrification. I think in other parts of the state, a lot of the electrification is occurring with heat pumps. You're also seeing, I think, a lot of electrification in other parts of the state in things of like line extensions to customers who previously did not have access to electricity. That's not available to us, practically speaking. So, you know, that's why you're going to see our Tier 3 measures are really sitting heavily in the transportation issue area for now. And that's not as strong a growth as something like going and electrifying a giant, you know, sugar arrangement or something like that. I still think we may see slight growth. And I think if we do see the slight growth and also can load control it, I think it's a good thing.
I was going to say, I think for us, the key metric going forward with exactly the question that you asked is really with the load factor for the grid. And James Muneer and I and Chris, we all have conversations around if we're going to add electric load through EVs or other beneficial means, doing it in a way that we can take maximum advantage of the current system, fill valleys as opposed to raising peaks and raising costs. And related to that, I think there's a future of the efficiency utility conversation in terms of, in that type of world, what are the best complementary measures and investments from the efficiency standpoint. And I think it's, and I think I flagged it on a later slide, but I'll just mention now. There's some interesting hard to reach markets, as Chris mentioned, in terms of, you know, renters, low moderate income, certainly new construction where conventional efficiency programs continue to make quite a bit of sense, I think, regardless in the future. There may also be, and we could be a good test for this, opportunities to see if the efficiency utility can play a greater load control role in terms of getting a packetized energy device into a home or helping customers with whether it's a heat pump or charging or other types of things, kind of leveraging that unique capability to help us manage the grid in a different way such that we can beneficially electrify. I recognize that's a broader conversation and one that's probably intertwined with a number of different proceedings, and it's something that's on our mind.
If you look at our IRP on the section on the T&D, and I think Muneer can speak to this more, our system is actually very robust. So, you know, we're not in a position where a minor load growth puts us in a lot of problems in our T&D system. It would, you know, if it were large and localized, you know, that's always an issue, but broad-based, we can handle, you know, as long as it's well managed, we can handle a lot of extra load right now without major T&D improvements. Is that a fair?
On the primary system, yes. I think the issue may surface, depends on the, the penetration rate and where they are located on the secondary side of the distribution system. Transformers, that's the wire to the
And
customer.
the reason I ask that is that I see sort of competing predictions, admittedly coming from different perspectives. There's at least one prediction out there that we're getting very close to the point where we're going to get a hockey stick increase in EVs. But I'm not seeing many utilities in Vermont, in fact, I'm not seeing any utilities in Vermont that are predicting that that's going to happen in my lifetime.
There's the forecasting function, obviously, and then and we're going to talk about this a little on the net zero slide. There's our aspirations, and our aspirations would include that hockey stick graph.
We would like to have the hockey stick.
That's where our push is going, and I do think that we are potentially on the cusp of that type of exponential growth. And our challenge in managing that is making sure that, to the maximum extent possible, if we're able to have those EV customers, even on the off-peak rate, contributing to the fixed cost of the system, which they will under our program, then there's a benefit clearly for every ratepayer. And that's something that I'd like to make a part of our efforts, is that as beneficial electrification rolls out, if we have that type of growth, there will still be some folks who may not immediately be able to afford an EV, or may not want a car at all and maybe commuting on a bike in Burlington. And I want to make sure that as much as is possible, every ratepayer gets a benefit from that. And that's one of our primary challenges.
So do many of the EV employees or any of you have an electric vehicle?
I'm going to say Mike over here has a plug-in hybrid. We do have a few other folks who do have electric and plug-in hybrids, and we actually are offering an employee benefit program called the Net Zero Employee Benefit, which is above and beyond the traditional city kind of employee benefit programs, where you can get $500 incentive towards the purchase of a plug-in or a hybrid, plug-in hybrid or an electric vehicle, or other types of energy efficiency measures, because we do see the value of leading by example. And our parking lot includes a few more EVs this year than it did last year. I'm hoping that that will continue.
I will say, and I'm generally known as a bit of a skeptic, when I tried driving the Bolt, that was an eye-opener. And so we're working on a lease program too that would give people the ability to use these cars for longer than a typical test drive. We would not be, by the way, owning cars, just so you know, lease cars, but so nobody panic on that front. But the idea is that a 5-mile test drive for an electric vehicle may not address the primary concerns that some people have. But I will tell you that they are very interesting to drive, and I would love to have one of my 2 cars convert to electric next time I'm up for a car. And I completely changed my view after driving a Bolt.
Which we took down today. We have 2
and I drove,
EVs.
because I drove.
Do you want to tell them about the state trooper you met?
Well, the first time you get in an EV and you step on the gas, it's like, oh my God, and as you press back into the seat. Our previous general manager, Neil, used to disturbingly tend to chirp the tires on it, on his way out of the parking lot. I'm not going to comment on. A little bit embarrassing, but there we were. He was a very focused driver. Still is, I'm sure.
James, maybe we can just quickly mention that we do have a partnership with Nissan up on Shelburne Road. So we offer a 4 to 5 day borrow program to city leadership. So that includes counselors and department heads.
Yeah.
Just starting. We'll keep you posted.
Europe as well. Excellent.
Thank you. So that was tier. Somehow we went from tier 1 to tier 3 to tier 2 and tier 3. I think we have a bit of an order thing here. This is just the balance of our RES compliance for 2017. Obviously tier 1, not a problem, and we are banking significant tier 1 recs forward. Tier 2 recs, we are banking tier 2 recs as well. Certainly, economically we're not averse if the prices are low to securing some of those, to keep our optionality. Then we lay out the savings of the specific actual tier 3 measures that we did, and you'll see it's essentially transportation heavy. And neither is it capable of meeting our full obligation. One thing I'd sort of mention on this, and Darren's going to hear this for the first time, so he probably loves that. But, there is language in the statute that would have allowed BED to apply essentially to modify its tier 3 requirement or be exempt from it, potentially. The language speaks to if you're both a DU and an EEU, you can request a modification of that. We intentionally chose not to pursue that. We actually really believe in these measures and in the value of these measures. And so we decided we'd rather find out if we can succeed rather than argue we can't succeed up front. And I think that was something we talked about with Darren in his interview, and he actually said that that was, if I may, one of the things that he thought was really neat about us. So again, we chose not to utilize that, and then we did so intentionally. But natural gas makes it challenging for us. And so transportation is our first best place we're looking. There are a couple of things working on the heating sector that would potentially help us in that sector, but so far that's been a challenge.
And to add on to that, in that decision-making, if we chose to pursue it, we knew we'd be closing an opportunity for learning. And the fact that we now have gotten ourselves into these measures and these programs, it's helped us figure out, all right, where can the energy efficiency and the Tier 3 programs learn to leverage off each other. So it has been a pretty phenomenal learning experience for the team.
We decided not to send $50,000 to a consultant arguing that we couldn't do something.
So building off of that conversation, obviously the state has ambitious goals around greenhouse gas reduction, around clean energy. Burlington, and this was another thing personally that was incredibly interesting to me in coming to work for Burlington Electric 2 years ago, has a net zero goal, a net zero energy city goal by 2030. And it's something that, following the accomplishment of being the first city in 2014 to source 100% of our power from renewable generation, Mayor Weinberger and Neil Lunderville, the previous general manager, and the team put together a roadmap for how do we move beyond that and start to tackle transportation and heating, which is the Tier 3 tools help us do that in part. And that is in our strategic plan, which is in the slides here as our kind of 2030 vision. And it's an incredibly ambitious and somewhat unique goal. I think we see net zero talked about in terms of buildings, individual buildings, in terms of sometimes individual sectors, but to have a multi-sector goal like that in that time frame, I think is fairly ambitious. And we're very much focused on how we get to meet that. And Jen Green is a unique position for us as a utility to have a sustainability officer who works with us and with the rest of the city on how do we meet goals like this. So we have, as part of our fiscal year 2019 budget, a net zero roadmap process. We ran an RFP, and Jen's going to talk about kind of what that looks like and what it's going to provide for us going forward.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Darren. Thank you again for having us. Yes, so we released an RFP in August. We had 14 proposals, a rigorous process in selecting the winner. We chose Synapse Energy Economics out of Cambridge, Mass. So they have hit the ground running. They're collecting our energy data now. This is the first sort of task of their total 4. They'll establish baseline information for us, look at sort of business as usual if we were to carry on as we are, and then they'll provide us with sort of 3 to 5 potential pathways that we might be able to take to transition the city to net zero, as Darren mentioned, in thermal transportation as we sort of build our renewable portfolio. And then by summer 2019, so coming up, we'll have a strategy on how we can theoretically get to net zero by 2030.
And this is based in part on the state total energy study, which was done in 2013. This is kind of a similar model for Burlington. Synapse is partnering with RSG, which is a local firm that does a lot of work in transportation. And we think that a lot of the information that we get from this process will not only aid us in the net zero roadmap process, it'll feed into a number of the documents that come here, the IRP, the DRP, the triennial plan, all of those types of things will benefit from having this. We don't currently have transportation data that we track. We don't currently, in fact, I would argue we don't really even know exactly how we should track transportation data in the city of Burlington. It's one of the initial questions for the scope of work is, are we concerned primarily with Burlington residents and where they're driving and how they're driving? Are we concerned with folks who are coming into the city and what modes they're using? What's the role of our commercial customers in terms of workplace charging, for example? What's the role of the transit company? All of these incredibly fascinating and complex questions are part of the net zero roadmap process for us.
What role, you haven't discussed today, what role is storage playing, and what are you all doing in the storage arena?
I would say, and James can add in on this, we are probably not going as quickly as other utilities on energy storage, partly because of the really tremendous reliability data that Munir mentioned. We don't have as much interest from our customers in terms of I want to have a battery because I'm worried that I'm going to be out for 2 to 3 days when there's a storm. So primarily when we've focused on storage, we've been focused on it from a peak reduction standpoint, and James can speak to that.
We were also looking particularly at storage at the airport, because there had been some interruptions of power there that, essentially, because the airport is a BED service territory that is external to our city boundaries, there's only so much we can do if the outage occurs on the GMP systems. We can't necessarily, change how they work their systems. But there was one proposal that was favorable, and that pricing was not maintained through the negotiation process, and the price came up. I mean, I'll throw out very, very ballpark numbers, if I may. We're seeing, if we were to do a 10-year financing for a storage array, of a reasonable size with a reasonable amount of storage density, you might be looking at $30 to $40 a kilowatt month as the charge. That's against a period of time where transmission costs are maybe $10 a kilowatt month, capacity costs maybe $7, and without the certainty that you'll necessarily affect all of those critical times. So the economics are challenging. We have other proposals we're looking at which would potentially be partnerships as opposed to BED owning it, which then brings in the tax credits and things like that, which may be more practical. So we may end up shifting away from the airport temporarily, since there's essentially at this point, no monetary stream for reliability. As a utility, a regular utility, we're hard pressed to make that investment, to a partnership structure for maybe a somewhat smaller battery to allow us to be experimenting in that place. So, they're expensive still. They remain expensive. And that was with a competitive RFP, with 5 final responses, 19 initial responses. And they now, after the change in the one bidder's price, they're clustered around that amount, I'm telling you. So it's not like you've got, that's the highest price or anything like that. So they're expensive.
Our calculus might be different if we had a reliability benefit.
If there was a literal monetary value that I could use as an additional revenue stream, the classic example would be if there were a specific T&D upgrade that you could avoid with a battery, that might very well change the equation. But if you're sitting there looking at the capacity market, the transmission savings, some energy arbitrage, maybe the regulation market, but I would qualify that market has a lot of people in the queue, and that market may get softer than it has been with the storage that's being proposed already. You're struggling with that value, those combination of those value streams to offset the cost of the project without one other source.
So you don't see it as a peak shaving benefit the way, like, as you know, GMP has this Powerwall project, and they see it, you have to have the two-way connection, obviously. Right. They see it as a way to tap in when they need peak load to somebody's battery, basically using the homeowner or the business as a storage facility.
We would have the same interest if a customer had a battery, and we've had conversations with customers. If a customer had a battery that they were going to purchase for purpose, perhaps reliability, perhaps they had, King Street Youth Center is an example. Some of our larger customers may have a need for a battery because they have backup requirements for power. If they had one, we would probably want to offer them a value stream in order to tap into that battery a certain number of times during peak season. So we see the same value proposition potentially. I think the difference is that some of those customers in other utility service territories may see the purchase of the battery as a reliability. Maybe it replaces a generator, for example. We just don't have that option really in Burlington, and it is a tribute to the reliability that our customers don't really have those generators to replace.
I mean, if you're looking at a $6,000 Powerwall against the outage numbers that he has, again, if there were one there, I would want to talk about controlling it, but I'm not aware of any, right? And I'm hard pressed to say that there's economic case for BED, incentivizing those kinds of storage devices in order to get the control of them. But where that storage exists, we are very interested in control of it. And we're working, when we do load control, we're doing it a different way. So we've got the Omega Grid program, we've done demand response programs for the last 2 summers. We're just not necessarily thinking that installing storage to then have demand response is necessarily economical for us where we sit.
Are your heat pumps that you put in, are they load controlled?
I think it's the one we've put in. I don't think it is actively load controlled at this point. We would need a device that would do that.
We are exploring not only, I know some of the newer heat pumps may have devices built into them, and there may be options there. We are also exploring and talking with folks like Packetized Energy and others about ways to retrofit heat pumps as well, because we're interested in exactly that.
This is where the natural gas is closing off your options.
It is really, making life a little difficult for us on that front. Now, we're also looking, Packetized Energy, we're working with them, because we actually work with them. We've helped them deploy BED metering inside their property so they can test their devices and things like that. So we actually partner with them to the extent we can. One of the things we're working with them on is using their Packetized Energy devices to intelligently control battery storage. So we have a battery storage device outside our building that we were provided by Northern Reliability as a loaner, essentially for 2 years. We're looking to control those. We're also using those storage devices through that Omega Grid program to try and see if they can be made economically dispatchable based on signals. So, we like the storage space. I think storage is the game changer. I just think storage is very expensive right now. I mean, if you were looking at, $40 a kilowatt a month, you could build a lot of peaking units for $40 a kilowatt a month right now. And they would have many of the same characteristics. But I think that will happen eventually. I think that's what, the ability to take that renewable energy and displace it to other times of the day, that's the game changer. It's just, but the price, one of the things that was very interesting was during the part of the RFP process, not everybody's price fell. I mean, we've all been talking about, prices of battery storage will fall. From the initial round of the RFP to the final round of the RFP, one went up significantly, one of the 5 went up a bit, one didn't change, and 2 came down slightly. I mean, it's not like you saw a wholesale collapse in the proposal of the installed cost of the battery storage in the last 18 months. So,
the other quick opportunity where the two worlds are blending, the EEU world and the Tier 3 or demand response world, is I've talked in the past about an existing large building's sequence of operations on the HVAC system. And while we're in there on the EEU side of the house trying to get the building tuned up, those energy management systems have the capability to be demand response ready. But they need programming, they may need a little extra work. But what the two teams are talking about is, how can we get that? If we have someone in the chair, the EEU side is paying for it from an efficiency standpoint, maybe we can add a little bit to get the building demand response ready. James's team says, here's the economic flow to the customer to play in our demand response efforts.
well, and again, this is something that his team was working on with my team, was for this summer's demand response program, I believe we were actually utilizing signals to building HVACs to prove it could be done, in particular our own. So for example, we were generating okay, this is a time where we need to do something, and then sending an electronic signal to our HVAC system to take action based on that. I think we're working with that with some of our larger customers too.
College in particular.
So we've had people we actually had increased impact every single demand response event through the summer because new people were signing up and allowing us to start to tell them, how they might control their HVAC system. So that was really cool too. So that's a case of his HVAC guru and one of my data gurus, sitting in a room together, and it scares me sometimes. The first time I'm in here, it's 100 degrees. You guys are going to hear about it. So.
We have one final slide, which I'm going to cover just very briefly, because some of these items, standard offer, for example, I recognize that I believe the PUC has already made a recommendation to the legislature. So our comments there may not be quite as relevant at the moment. Needless to say, we continue to seek to have an exemption access for that program, given our investments and accomplishments with being 100% renewable on the generation and then on the rec side as well. The regulatory innovation piece here is something that I think we've talked about in some respects. I think we're interested in working on ways to continue to evolve the EEU model such that it serves the customers who are going to require a number of the services that we provide today, but also potentially complements the strategic electrification and net zero vision that we have. And I wouldn't say that we have every single answer to exactly how that looks, but we're interested potentially in flexibility and being able to pilot and test some new types of offerings in the energy efficiency space that would best complement this electrification model. And I know Chris and his team, James and his team, and us as a company will continue to engage with the Commission, with the department on those questions. The EV charging infrastructure, I offered comments at the workshop that you held this summer. We continue to be interested in that as well. We have 14 public charging stations with 26 ports. We see a really strong role for workplace and residential charging in the near future while maintaining access for public charging stations. I don't think we're convinced that a massive investment in public charging stations in Burlington necessarily makes sense at the moment. We think we are not maybe able to even fully utilize the current network to the extent we'd like to see, and the business case there isn't quite where it would need to be to make a significant outlay from the utility standpoint in additional public charging stations. We see great opportunities with workplace charging, great opportunities for off-peak residential charging. And I mentioned earlier, we're interested in partnering with third parties. We definitely would like to see kind of a level playing field for those types of investments and partnership opportunities. We don't want to not have the different types of third-party vendors in that space. We think it's great that they're there, but we want to make sure that there's transparency, consumer protection related to that.
And also, again, this was not an intentional segue, but having tried to deal with integrating the data from like the charging stations into our billing systems, we're cognizant of the barriers to that. That it's not as simple as saying, oh well, we'll give you the metering data and you bill it. It's not that easy. So we're concerned about the implications on our systems and our staffing and things like that of having to assess or implement multiple different data streams, potentially different formats from different companies. That's our focus, is how do we make it happen, not do we stop it from happening.
And I assume it's obligatory for us to say that we are facing a number of different overlapping regulatory deadlines. I always appreciate flexibility with that, but I imagine you are as well. So.
I mean, and I'd offer something on that too. I mean, we've tried to address that with our staff sharing arrangement with VEPSA, so you start to see things now coming in with VEPSA and BED logo head on the same paper. Who knew that was ever going to happen? I would have said that somewhere somebody's turning over in their grave probably. So that means that I have access to Melissa, and Tom to draft filings on behalf of either or both entities. And I can ask one of them. I could ask Melissa to file on behalf of BED if I needed to, but it's still a pretty heavy lift right now in terms of scheduling and deadlines and trying to stay on top of things that are material. So it's a challenge.
Our final page is just our strategic plan, which is the 2018-2019 version. It's a one-page plan, includes the net zero goal and a number of the initiatives that we talked about today. But don't get too attached to it because we're in the process of updating to the 2019-2020 version. And I expect that actually some of our, not only our initiatives, which do change year to year, but potentially some of our strategic objectives may evolve to really reflect the organizational focus on continuing to be reliable and affordable and provide great customer care and have safety as a critical value, and how that core also translates into the future that we're talking about, and how everybody in the company who's playing a role can see themselves in the net zero vision, because all of the foundational pieces there are what allow us to have our customers' trust to go forward with those types of new initiatives. So we're going to be changing not only the initiatives, potentially the objectives to reflect that as well. And those were the slides that we had. Appreciate all the tremendous questions and dialogue as well.
Thank you very much. It's been very helpful to hear what you're saying about deadlines.
Appreciate that.
There are bugaboo also.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
And a couple of times I've had to talk my staff off a ledge, but it's okay. They're good. It's like, don't jump.
Were there other items or questions that we didn't address that you had?
I'm just a little curious about net metering in your territory, because I saw that solar was a tiny slice of the resources.
Yes.
And obviously you don't have available open land the way other parts of Vermont do, but there are a lot of roofs.
Yes.
And if you could just describe what's happening in net metering in your territory and whether it's been beneficial or a challenge or anything about that. I have a very vague picture.
We continue to have, I think, significant interest in the 15 kW and under residential net metering space. We're challenged in a couple of unique ways across the board with net metering. We certainly don't have the big open spaces, so we don't see a lot of 500 kW or even 150 kW coming in and locating and setting up group systems. We have areas of the city where residential rooftop makes sense. We have shading issues, certainly. We have a lot of tree cover in the city, so sometimes there will be shading issues. We have some types of historic buildings, and we have slate roofs. In a lot of cases, that's a barrier, at least with current technology. I understand there's new kind of slate roof solar that's coming out as well. So we've seen in a number of cases, well, yeah, but we've seen a number of cases that somebody signs up for the solar shopper program, and we go to get them the estimate, and there isn't an estimate, and it comes back from the vendor, slate roof, too much shading. We get those types of issues. The area where we're most challenged, I think, is in the group net metering space, because we do have customers who are interested in that, who either have a single family home that they can't do solar on the roof or the property. We have the renters who don't have access. We'd like to have more opportunities for group net metering. There have been some innovative examples on commercial building rooftops. We have a customer that has a commercial building rooftop system where the output is made available to their in-city employees on a group basis. That's a creative model. But we probably, if we were going to see growth in the group net metering space and make those types of systems available, it'd be with the support of some of our commercial customers who might have a appropriate rooftop space and might say that they'd be willing to put in an installation, take some of the output themselves, and make some available. I've had a number of conversations with folks encouraging that arrangement. We haven't done anything formal to establish it, and one constraint we have, which I mentioned earlier, the IT upgrades. When we go through and complete those IT upgrades, managing the group net metering system will likely be a little bit less administratively complex and manual for us as it is now, and there might be more enthusiasm from some of our billing and analytics staff around it.
I know that is an issue for VIPs and small communities.
Yes.
I think we're, because of the constraints that Darren mentioned, we're not in a place where we view net metering as problematic at all, and in point of fact, we're perfectly happy and have helped our customers like Burlington, UVM, evaluate and solar proposals, net metering proposals. I actually presented the DDM trustees on net metering proposals that I thought they should have implemented. You actually heard, I think you heard, Tom, recently from UVM, Melissa, from Michelle, asking questions about net metering. That's us working with them to try to figure out how they can work within the net metering constraints to take advantage of them. So we certainly don't, we try to help with net metering at this point. We're not.
I was just surprised to see what a sliver it was.
Yeah, it's a significant amount of peak day capacity relative to the overall generation. We do have, I think, well above 10% of the peak for the system could be potentially met by some of the solar resources in the city, but it's not a large generator for us. I do think, though, and this goes to James's point, our customers are interested in solar, and we've seen, obviously, nationally there are some utilities that are pushing back pretty heavily on some of those things. And I think that if we're going to embrace the model that we want to help customers with heat pumps, with electric vehicles, with new technologies, we need to be open to helping them with this technology as well. Even if the economics of net metering may or may not be as beneficial depending on which customer class and which iteration of net metering that they're in. I'm a net metering customer from the earlier version of the program, so I'm probably less economic for the utility than the customer who comes in today because you've created a trajectory where the price has come down. But we really view this as a benefit for customers, and we view it as strengthening the relationship that Chris's team and Mike's team has with our customers.
So, and also one other thing I just want to mention too, when you look at that pie chart, that's our purchases. We don't necessarily consider,
good point.
that is solar that you're seeing there that we buy at wholesale.
Oh, okay.
From purchase power agreements. We have we have 7 purchase power agreements and 2 owned arrays.
Well, that explains everything.
Well, it helps,
Yeah.
but again, I think you'd find that our average size of a net metering array is smaller and rooftop based, and not 500 kW field mounted and stuff, which I personally think is true net metering. But also the other thing is that's 2017 you're looking to, and that, by the way, the South 40 Solar, which is a 2.5 megawatt AC array, was not energized for the majority of 2017. So again, that's purchases, not net metering, and it's not including South 40 at this point. So.
And James, would you have statistics on how much of a load reducer it's been? Once you said purchase, I realized that's why that thing is. We are blessed. If none of you have met him, we are blessed with a gentleman named Mike Leach, who is sort of the ultimate answer to load forecasting in Vermont, at least in my opinion. So we do know
what the total solar output, I think there's like a total of maybe 6 small early net metering arrays that we don't have generation meters on. But we do know that information, so.
If I remember correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, but this past summer, if you looked at all the in-city solar and looked at our peak and then our net and gross, I think solar contributed at least several megawatts worth of reduction, if I'm remembering correctly, which was not significant on a 65 megawatt peaking system.
Oh, at least.
Yeah, I'm being conservative probably.
Probably conservative.
I won't have the numbers right, but it's at least 200 separate installs throughout the city. Net metering with CPGs, I believe, we're somewhere around 4.5 megawatts.
Yep. So 4.5
So
there,
that's
plus
fairly-
then probably
Hitting
2.5.
on roofs, most of them.
Yeah, 2.5 for South 40. Our owned arrays are another 600 kW, and then there's 6 PPAs that add some more to that too. So I mean, it's not insignificant, but it's a mixture of purchases and net metering.
The only reason it's not larger peak reduction is because I think our peak occurs later in the afternoon.
Yeah, that has been sliding, and that does affect that.
Yeah. Thank you, that was really interesting.
All right, well, thank you all
Thank you
again.
very much.
Thank you all.
Appreciate
Really
your time.
appreciate it. I guess we can go up this way and avoid the congestion on that. Thank you very much, really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Sarah, take care.
Yes.
We need to go single level event sometimes.
Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you guys. All right, see you guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks very much.
I've only been here about 9 months now.
Nice to meet you.
And I don't see you nearly as much as I used to.
I know, I used to see you all the time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Oh,
Yeah,
thank you.
Yes.
And thank you very much.
Oh, yes, I'm
Thank you.
sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.